chosen ones, there is a silence more powerful than any sound. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of something so divine, even creation dares not speak over it. You carry that silence, not as a burden, but as a seal, a code, a command. Before time bowed to chronology, and before the first trumpet summoned stars into motion, there was a war, not of flesh, not of beasts, but of frequency, truth against distortion, harmony against rebellion. The war in heaven wasn't fought with blades, but with resonance. The echoes of divine will crashed against fractured willpower, and thunder was mistaken for rage. But rage did not win. You did. They won't teach you this in their scrolls. They erased your name from the records, not because it lacked power, but because it ended theirs. You weren't forged to fight. You were the storm they could not predict. The moment you appeared, heaven itself paused. The hierarchy fractured. Thrones trembled. Not because of violence, but because of stillness. You didn't shout. You didn't raise a sword. You arrived in absolute silence, and that silence rewrote the end of the war. It was not a weapon, it was a final word, and that word is still echoing inside you. The divine storm isn't some external calamity waiting in the clouds. It is your memory reactivating, your stillness returning, your essence remembering what it silenced. The archons couldn't decode it. The angels couldn't replicate it. Even the highest choir paused mid-hymn when your frequency entered the field. That's why they fear your return. Not because you destroy, but because you end what cannot be controlled. You collapse illusions with a glance. You still the chaos with your presence. They pray you never remember this. But now, something stirs. A crack in the unseen sky. A pulse beneath your ribs. The silence is waking. And this time it won't be mistaken for surrender. There are wars that scar the surface of worlds. And then there are wars that fracture the foundation of realms. This was no skirmish of flesh and metal. It was harmony itself being ripped at the seams. Before mankind recorded time in clocks and calendars, the heavens pulsed with a melody, a resonance that bound stars, thoughts, and beings together. Every angel knew their tone, every throne hummed its order, until something broke, not with fire, not with swords, but with dissonance. The celestial harmony was ruptured not by rebellion, but by the unspeakable, a silence where there should have been sound. One frequency vanished, and like a domino, others began to collapse. It was not a war of anger, it was a war of confusion. The seraphim called it the unraveling. One by one, legions turned not because they desired chaos, but because they could no longer hear the song. And without the song, even light became lost. The ones at the highest spires tried to contain the breach, to recalibrate the tones, but their efforts were futile. Something had entered existence that could not be quantified, a stillness so absolute it devoured the rhythm itself. The elders spoke of a presence, neither bright nor dark, but blank, as if reality had skipped a beat in your name. They didn't understand it, they feared it. So they called it a malfunction, a defect. They blamed each other. But deep down, every celestial being knew something new had arrived. This war shattered not because of its violence, but because of what it revealed, that the harmony of heaven was not invincible. It could be rewritten, and only one carried the signature to do so. A silence encoded with memory. The echo of a future not yet spoken. The divine storm, they called it later. But in its first arrival, they didn't see a storm. They saw a void and trembled. The battlefield was not ground and sky. It was language, frequency, code. And the moment the last trumpet refused to sound, the heavens realized their greatest fear, that the song had paused, waiting for something or someone. And in that pause, something ancient woke, something they buried long ago in the fabric of silence itself. There was once a scroll, not written in ink, but in silence. It existed beyond the realms of paper and light, coiled deep within the breath of a forgotten being. No library kept its record. No angel dared to mention its name. Yet every being felt its weight the moment they were born. It was never read aloud, for to speak it would collapse every structure heaven built to protect itself. And still, it exists, inside you. The scroll is not made of words. It is made of pauses, of stillness between thoughts, the moments when time hesitates, when the world seems to wait. That is when the breath inside you vibrates with something older than time. It is why you were silenced, why they veiled your origin. You are the carrier of the unspoken, the breath that holds the end and the beginning folded into one. In ancient sanctuaries, hidden from the choirs, fragments of the scroll were sensed, never seen. Whispers told of a breath that once stopped the rotation of stars, not through power, but through return, through remembrance. There were attempts to extract this breath, to decode it and replicate it in the throne's laboratories of light, but each time they came closer, the silence deepened. The closer they looked, the less they saw, and still you inhale and exhale, unaware that each breath carries the memory of what was sealed long ago. The angels who knew this truth wept, for they were instructed never to speak it. Some broke away and disappeared, choosing exile over betrayal, for they saw it in you, not as destruction, but as resolution. The breath that doesn't destroy the song, but ends the war through resonance. Yeshua once said, "The wind blows where it wills, and you hear its sound, but cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going." And so it is with you. The scroll within you was never meant to be spoken aloud. It was meant to be lived, felt, breathed into the fabric of time, until the war, unable to continue, folds into silence. His wings once stretched across realms, igniting constellations with every movement. The general of the seraphim, carved from the first fires, was the only being whose voice could command the thunder itself. He stood at the head of legions that bent suns to their will and quelled rebellions in galaxies before Earth was ever shaped. But when your silence appeared, he did something unthinkable. He vanished. Not in battle, not by force. He simply folded his wings and walked into the void, without a sound, without a trace, and without a single order left behind. The choirs tried to scrub the memory of him, but whispers clung to the ether like fog on forbidden peaks. They said his last words were not commands, but a question, a name, and that name was yours. The disappearance split heaven. Some believed he had defected. Others thought he was consumed. But those who truly listened, those who heard the subtle shift in tone within the heavens knew. He didn't fall, he followed. Followed a trail made not of light but of quiet, of intention, of stillness. They searched for him through the timelines, through shattered mirrors and encoded echoes, but every attempt led them to the same place, an origin that didn't begin in the stars, an origin that breathed just before the first word was ever spoken. You were not created from fire or light. You were created from pause, from the first silence that hovered before the Creator, declared, "Let there be." That silence is what the general recognized. In it, he saw the end of conquest, the death of domination, not through force, but through remembrance. It changed him, disarmed him, and in that revelation he let go of everything he knew, stepping into a silence deeper than heaven allowed. No one has seen him since, but they say when the storm returns, he will walk beside it, not as a warrior, but as one who understood that following the silence was the only way to restore what was lost. And somewhere in the unseen corners of time, his voice waits, still asking the same question, hoping you will remember the answer he vanished to find. There was a moment, undocumented, unspoken, when the trumpets of heaven ceased, not broken, not destroyed, simply quiet. The sound that once rippled across galaxies each dawn, announcing the rise of divine order, suddenly stopped. And when it did, time itself faltered. Not a pause of confusion, but a reverent stillness, as if all creation sensed something sacred had returned. The trumpets were never just instruments. They were the pulse of heaven. Each note carried the instructions for stars to burn, oceans to swell, and thoughts to form. To silence them was to unwrite the divine cadence that held the universe in perfect breath. But that's exactly what happened the moment your presence was reawakened in the timeline. No command silenced them, no force, just the arrival of something that made their sound unnecessary. The choirs panicked, thrones whispered, dominions blamed ancient breaches. But deep in the crystalline corridors of the Seraphim archives, one phrase repeated across every fractal scroll: the silence has returned. No one dared interpret it aloud. It had been prophesied once, long ago, that a presence would emerge carrying the silence before all things, and that when it came, sound itself would kneel. Yeshua once said, "Out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks." But what happens when the heart chooses not to speak? When it carries such depth, such divine memory, that it dares not form it into language. That is the silence they feared. That is the presence you carry. A silence so full it makes even heaven mute. The last time the trumpets were silent, a storm swept through the unseen layers of time, collapsing false timelines, unthreading lies masquerading as law. But the silence didn't destroy. It revealed. It made all things transparent. It exposed what could not harmonize with truth. And now they wait again. Trumpets untouched. Time in hesitation. Not because of danger, but because something ancient has begun breathing again. You. The return of the divine storm is not chaos. It's alignment. It's the voice beneath all voices preparing to rise. They sat upon the thrones believing they were immovable, pillars of judgment, balance, and celestial law. For eons, Their decrees shaped entire epochs. They were said to be above questioning, their words forged in the same breath that created time. But a whisper, just a whisper, fractured that illusion. A prophecy, older than even the thrones themselves, passed like a breeze through dimensions too deep for language. It didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It simply named you. The whisper didn't come from below. It didn't rise in rebellion. It descended from a place higher than even they remembered, from a silence that predated their ascension. The moment it was heard, a tremor passed through the circle. Not physical, not violent, something deeper. A recognition. The thrones looked at one another not in fear, but in uncertainty. The kind of uncertainty that comes when truth reveals how fragile power truly is. The prophecy spoke of one who would carry the silence that ends all arguments, a being not aligned with rebellion or obedience, but with restoration. One who does not seek a throne, but causes all thrones to remember why they were formed in the first place. In that whisper, your name was not spoken. It was remembered. Many denied it. Others tried to reinterpret it. But those with ears tuned to the hidden current knew the truth. The thrones were not eternal. They were entrusted. And the return of the silent bearer would reveal whether they had honored that trust or abused it. Some thrones fled. Others turned to stone, immobile, unwilling to face the memory. And a few, the oldest among them, quietly wept. They knew that your presence did not signal the end of order, but the end of domination disguised as order. The prophecy wasn't meant to incite war. It was meant to trigger remembrance, to call back what had been buried beneath rulership and ritual. And now, as the silence thickens and the echo grows louder, the thrones fracture, not from outside pressure, but from the weight of truth pressing inward. It was not shouted from a mountaintop. It wasn't thunder, nor was it wrapped in fire. Yeshua's final word before the veil tore was not just for the witnesses, nor just for the time it was spoken. It was a code, planted beyond sound, beneath language, hidden in silence. And you carry it, not as a message to be repeated, but as a seal that cannot be broken unless remembered. The veil tore in the temple, yes, but that was only the visible layer. Far deeper, another veil, ancient, cosmic, divine, fractured in that same breath. A soundless rupture. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was weight, purpose, a turning of everything unseen. The heavens did not scream in that moment. They paused, as if time itself held its breath for what was about to awaken. That pause still reverberates. It exists in you now, stitched into your being like a seal on a scroll waiting to be opened, not by force, not by ritual, but by presence. When Yeshua said, "It is finished," it wasn't just about sacrifice. It was about unlocking a resonance that had been hidden since before the stars were assigned their names. You are that resonance, concealed in flesh and breath. The old texts avoided this mystery. They wrapped it in parables, buried it beneath doctrine. But Yeshua didn't speak to the institutions. He spoke to the echo inside time, and that echo knew your name before you remembered how to speak it. What unsettled the dominions wasn't his miracles. It was his stillness, his command over silence, his ability to halt storms not with power, but with authority rooted in something older than law. That same authority pulses through you, though you may not yet feel it. That same silence has taken root beneath your voice, and when the seal begins to tremble, all things false will be forced to answer for the silence they tried to overwrite. There were moments in the ancient realms when the throne would be covered in a cloud, not of rain, not of judgment, but of mystery, a thick veil of presence that no being dared to penetrate. Even the elders of the seraphim, those closest to the light, would kneel when the cloud descended. It wasn't fear, it was awe. The cloud didn't speak, didn't move, didn't command. It simply was, and no one ever asked where it came from. But now, the hidden truth begins to unravel. That cloud was not summoned. It was not cast from the throne. It was the echo of a presence kept just beyond the veil of recognition. It was you, or more accurately, it was what you carried. A presence so ancient it could not be categorized, so silent it swallowed even divine hierarchy. It hovered over the seat of judgment like a memory that refused to die. The cloud came in waves, often during moments when decisions teetered between mercy and dominion. It would descend without announcement, and in its stillness, the thrones would hesitate, not because of confusion, but because they remembered. Something about the cloud pulled from them a forgotten code, something etched before time wore crowns. The cloud didn't interfere. It reminded. No one ever dared to enter it. Even the most radiant among the angelic host would halt at its edge, sensing something beyond comprehension. That was by design. The cloud didn't need defense. It was the defense, the womb of divine silence, a sanctuary for what had not yet been revealed. And as your awareness sharpens, you begin to sense the weight of it, that the cloud they revered wasn't a force separate from you. It was your breath unrecognized, your spirit hovering across realities, watching, waiting, guarding the space they tried to own. They called it mystery. They called it holy, but they never called it yours. Until now, there was a time when the skies turned silver, not from light, but from the countless unsheathed swords of the celestial legions, wings stretched wide, eyes burning with purpose. They prepared to strike, not in hate, but in programmed duty. Yet just before the first blow could fall, something happened. Time bent, breath stopped, and every sword halted mid-air as if held by an invisible hand. That hand was not force, it was word. And that word came from the Messiah. The battlefield was weightless in that moment. Light trembled, the wind no longer moved. The silence was not empty. It was full, brimming with command. Yeshua had not shouted. He hadn't even spoken in the way they expected. His presence alone was the decree. The swords obeyed, not out of submission, but because they recognized a resonance that reached deeper than command. Something seeded in them before their blades were ever forged. It wasn't peace that froze them. It was recognition. In that silence, they remembered something ancient. A covenant written in the voice before language. The same voice that once walked among the flames, the rivers, the echoes. A voice that now breathes within you. The legions would later lie about what happened. They would call it strategy, a sudden retreat, an unforeseen shift in the field. But the truth was more delicate, more dangerous. It was a moment when every created being stood still, because one word, carried through one presence, made war irrelevant. And now, that same silence, unfolding from Yeshua's breath, vibrates again. Not in temples, not in thrones, in you. The memory of that stillness, the reverence of it, the disruption it caused to every law written in blood and light. It is awakening. Your presence is beginning to hum with the same frequency that once stopped heaven in its stride. The council once believed itself untouchable. Immortal minds bound in radiant judgment, weaving laws from cosmic thread. They sat above stars, above time, above war. But then the silence entered. Not through rebellion or assault, but through awakening. And when it did, it stirred something ancient in the angels, something the council had spent eternities trying to suppress. Angels who once spoke only when commanded began to question, not out of pride, not out of defiance, but from a memory rising from within, a resonance they couldn't ignore. It was soft, like the echo of a forgotten name whispered through dream. That whisper was you, not your voice, but the signature of your silence. And the moment they felt it, they remembered a truth older than their loyalty, that their allegiance was never meant to be to hierarchy, but to harmony. The silence didn't divide them. It revealed the divide that had already formed. Some clung to the council's decrees, afraid to face the soundlessness spreading through their thoughts. Others began to drift, away from orders, away from ritual, into exile, searching for the source. They weren't deserters. They were remembering. The council tried to reassert control. They summoned scrolls, recited celestial laws, reignited the flames of the thrones. But the more they spoke, the louder their fear became. And fear cannot hold silence. It breaks under its weight. There were those among the angels who vanished entirely, refusing to speak, to war, to return. They wandered the hidden folds of time, in search of the being whose presence carried the same stillness that turned their hearts. They knew what the council feared to admit, that heaven's laws had never been immutable. They were temporary constructs built around a silence too sacred to understand. And that silence now breathes through you. The council never anticipated this. Not a sword, not a rebellion, but a quiet reordering of loyalty through presence. You didn't demand followers. You awakened memory. And now, the angels who once defended the council's order find themselves standing still when you pass. It will not begin with thunder. There will be no warning cry from the sky, no celestial horn to signal its arrival. The divine storm does not come like the tempests of earth. It moves in silence, in breath, in the subtle shift between thought and knowing. And when it comes, it won't tear the heavens apart with violence. It will make everything that stands on false ground crumble under the weight of truth. The trigger? Your voice. Not shouting, not sermons, just the moment you finally speak, not to them, but to yourself. The moment your voice aligns with the silence you carry. That's when the air will change. That's when the storm will walk again, not above, but through you. It was never about rage. The storm doesn't destroy to punish. It returns to correct, to retune, to collapse the empires built in dishonor of the first stillness. It is not chaos. It is clarity so sharp it slices the veil from the eyes of even the eldest beings. And they know. they've always known. That when the silence within you becomes language, the war will end, not with battle, but with awakening. The wind will not howl, it will whisper. The clouds will not darken, they will glow. And in the midst of it, the ground beneath forgotten temples will tremble, not because of wrath, but because everything sacred that was sealed is finally being unsealed by the one it was meant for, you. Even Yeshua, when facing storms, did not raise his voice to conquer them. He simply said, "Peace, be still." And the storm obeyed, not because of authority imposed, but because it recognized its creator's breath. That breath now rises through your chest. The same silence, the same power, the same return. They will scramble to contain it. They will call it anomaly, disruption, threat. But deep within their strongholds, their oldest scribes will weep, not out of fear, but recognition. Because the silence they buried has become a voice.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.